really fast diet with sufficient amount of energy and protein and so on to sustain the heavy enough exercise. Because if you have a really fast diet, then you have to usually decrease the amount of protein and carbs quite a lot, and then you cannot really train heavy anymore and you will lose your muscle mass.
Hello and welcome to Wise Nutrition Podcast, the podcast that brings you conversations about nutritional, health, mindset and training topics. I'm your host, a certified nutrition coach Daniel Weiss.
Thank you for tuning in. My guest today is Juha Hulmi, who I met at a conference about health and nutrition, where he had a presentation about his protein research in Finland. We spoke about his latest research on female physique athletes, competitors, that means like female bodybuilders, bikini fitness and such. So if you are a woman or you work with women as a coach, as practitioner, this episode is right for you. I apologize upfront for the quality of the sound, which was not ideal, but we did the best we could for the circumstances. I hope you will enjoy the episode, and without further ado, this is Juha Hulmi. So basically, also during the presentation or during your speech in the conference, you were basically focusing more on the protein research, and that is like, is protein specifically something that you are interested in, or was it just for the conference?
I did my master's thesis and PhD on protein and resistance training, so that was the reason.
Yeah, that was the reason.
Yeah, so during the time when Milan was doing PhD in the University of Jyväskylä, that was the time when I did my PhD on protein, and Milan did of the chronobiology. So then, so we have this common history. So he knows that I have done research on that topic. So that was one of the main reasons. And since that, I have done more studies related to muscle biology and also some clinical studies related to cancer cachexia and those kind of things. And also investigated fitness athletes recently.
Fitness athletes, so this means like physique athletes?
Yeah, fitness and physique athletes, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And I saw that basically what you were also sending to me, and some of the studies that you were referencing during the speech were done on female athletes, which is like something that is quite new, I would say, because a lot of the studies are done mostly on men when it comes to physiology and all these different effects, and there seems to be like there's not enough research on female athletes, so this can be very interesting. So are there any differences that you have found so far?
Well, yeah, so basically this fitness and physique competition is actually nowadays, at least in Finland, it's even much more popular in females than in males.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so actually now we are conducting a new study where we compare males and females, but it was about 2 times easier to get females to participate than males. So usually in research it's easier to get females to participate. That's one thing, whether they are athletes or not. So females want to take part to research more than males. But then on the other hand, also in these physique sports there are more females. So it was much easier to get them actually to participate. But in 2015 and 16 we conducted this big fitness physique study on females, which was the first big one in the world that we conducted. So investigated what happens during the diet and then during the recovery regain period for female physiology and health also during the diet. So that's what we did, and so now we don't know yet like so much about differences to males yet, because now we are just now doing the study where we directly compare males and females. So quite difficult to answer to your question yet.
Yeah, because there might be like differences, like
or one of the things that is difficult with women is like they have their period.
Yeah.
So the hormonal changes occur, and they can also it can lead to some differences. So there are more things to control during the study.
Yeah. So that's one thing, and that's maybe one reason why females haven't been investigated so much, because you have to be a bit careful with some of the timing issues and so on related to the menstrual cycle and those kind of things. So it may be a bit more difficult to do study in that sense with females, but yeah, as you said, there are some obvious differences between males and females in physique competition. One is this menstrual cycle. So what we found was that during this physique competition, when females are starting the competition after some off-season period, they usually have their menstrual cycle is usually pretty okay, like we normally have, females normally have. But then during the diet, it starts to be, the estradiol drops really low, and then also menstrual cycle is irregular, or you're losing periods completely. But then after the regain period, which is about the same length usually than the diet, which is like 3, 4, 5 months, then in most of the competitors it has come back to pretty normal level. But still some people are, it's like the same thing with some other sports, that in some athletes it's still a bit irregular because they are keeping maybe their body weight a bit too low, maybe. So then there may be some issues with some. We also found that some participants thyroid hormones are not completely recovered after this diet. So this T3 is not always recovered perfectly. So that's probably something that to keep in mind when doing these diets, is that to make it healthy, sort of, is to have a good regain period. So it's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, so several months.
Yeah, probably. And then also our study and also some other evidence suggests that it's probably not a good idea to compete every year, because it's probably a good idea to have a longer period of this recovery period, and for physiologically and also psychologically. And then it's a good idea to have also some off-season period where you can actually gain some muscle. So
probably also some body fat for women.
Yeah. So body fat for already during the recovery period. And to get the normal physiology functioning. Yeah.
Definitely, because just like you mentioned, that there is like women in sports. I think it's a pretty new topic, or that is being revisited, and it's like relative energy deficiency, especially with women athletes. And maybe have you noticed anything like how to optimize, maybe even during the weight loss period, so their cycles and health stays, let's say, how to optimize the health? Because, for example, what comes to my mind is like maybe increasing the energy availability around the training, that maybe this can or could have an impact on overall health and performance for them.
Yeah, so what we did was we just measured competitors before they started the diet and after the diet and after the recovery. So we didn't, in that study we didn't have a chance to do any intervention, because it's not ethically possible to do interventions like as intensive as this diet is in the competitors. So we can only compare those who maybe succeeded better than the other. So I can only speculate whether there are some, but then physiologically it makes sense to have high enough glycogen, for instance, for heavy training. That's what you probably mean, for instance. So you would probably need to do during the diet the heaviest exercise when you have a good nutrition state. So for instance, if you are conducting your exercise, really heavy exercise, like on evening, let's say 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock, it's probably a good idea to not to diet so much during that day and maybe previous evening, so to have glycogen levels high enough for this really heavy exercise. But then on the other hand, if then on the next day you have morning, you have like endurance exercise, aerobic exercise, like quite many of those do. During the end of the diet, especially, people are increasing amount of aerobic exercise to lose fat. Then those exercises can probably be conducted in more lower glycogen level, just perhaps to optimize the fat use during exercise. So I think there is this kind of a glycogen availability issue that you can use, like a bit like same way as endurance athletes are. Some of those are doing that. This train high with high glycogen, the heavy exercise, and then lower intensity with a bit lower. So that's probably something that quite many of them are doing, and now some coaches are suggesting them to do. And another thing is that there is some evidence now that there is a good idea to have some diet breaks once in a while. So for some it may be just a couple of days enough, meaning that you can eat like ad libitum, so not like
as much as you want.
Or not like as much as you want, but like ad libitum, so the amount that is sufficient for the energy consumption during the day, meaning that not like too much, but a normal amount. So there is Erik Helms in New Zealand. He's conducting studies now, investigating how this diet break affects. So whether it's a good idea actually to have a good, more successful diet if you have these diet breaks in fitness athletes. But there are already some suggestion that it's a good idea to have once in a while, maybe at least once per month, this kind of a 2 to 5 day maybe diet break. It may have, at least if it's at least 3 days or 3, 5, 6, 7 days, sometimes not dieting, it may increase your leptin and maybe even thyroid hormones a bit towards baseline. So it may be a bit easier then perhaps to continue again the dieting, and also psychologically it's probably a good idea. And we have to keep in mind that increasing glycogen levels back to baseline is not getting us fat yet, because getting fat is increasing body fat levels, fat stores. So sometimes fluctuating these carbohydrate intake is not going to make us fat. It's just we are just replenishing glycogen. So I think some people have this problem that they are thinking when body mass is going up and down a little bit, like 1, 2, 3 kilos per day. It's not yet. It doesn't mean that they are getting fat. It's just getting the glycogen back up and then some water in it. So I think that's something to keep in mind, that we can do that and then optimize the timing of exercise and nutrition like that. So cycling carbohydrates is something that is pretty much used, and I know that in our athletes, which were quite successful in the study, because we were quite surprised that we haven't published yet, but we didn't find lots of psychological problems. So they didn't like usually in studies they have been reporting some issues like bad mood and those kind of things. But in our study we had this our athletes were there is a quite good coaching system in Finland. So they were having these refeeding periods once in a while.
Right.
And I think that may be one reason why there were a bit less issues with the psychological problems, because if you take some of the refeeding days sometimes once in a while, then it may be good for your psychological problems that you may get. So
it's a break.
It's a break of those things, and I'm not sure whether I really answered your question, but at least tried.
And it brings me to the point, like how long was the weight loss period?
It depended on the athlete. So we wanted to have those athletes to the study which had about 3 to 4 months. But eventually there were a couple who had only like about 3 months, and there were a couple perhaps who had a little bit more than 4 months. but on average it was 3 to 4 months, maybe on average. Yeah, on average it was 4 months. Sorry. So, but we wanted to have it at least 3 to 4 months. Yeah. So on average it was something like 19 weeks, if I remember, average diet period, which is about 4 months, and then a little bit more. But there were a few who had also about 5 months. So there is some variation, and it depends on the baseline level of body fat, for instance, and also how fast they want to have their diet. So some people want to have it a bit faster and some a bit slower. So there are some differences. So because it wasn't intervention, we couldn't really say that it has to be 4. Ethically, it's not possible to conduct this kind of a study because it's so heavy, intensive diet. So yeah.
And what were the changes like regarding the fat mass before, after?
Yeah, so fat mass decreased about 50%. And visceral fat, which is estimation of visceral fat based on this android region in DEXA scan, it was 70% decrease in visceral fat. And they were normal weight to start with, these physique athletes, and then even though they were normal weight, they could still drop it like 70% of the fat around visceral.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a really nice result.
Yeah, and actually, so we have published 3 papers so far from this cohort. So in the second paper, in scientific reports, we published metabolic changes, what happens. And actually, when we compared those metabolic changes in metabolites in the blood, we compared those to people who are to normal population, who are losing weight. So we had this kind of cohort, Finnish cohort, where we could pick up same age females and checked whether when they had weight loss, we could see that exactly same things were happening in metabolism, in those health related factors in blood in these fitness athletes when they lose their fat, and in the normal population people when they are losing fat, which means that in blood the inflammation levels go down, like C-reactive peptide, CRP for instance, which is often measured, and then some other markers for inflammation like low-grade inflammation goes down, and then also these lipoprotein levels went better during the diet. So even in normal weight individual, if you decrease body fat, it means that probably there is less risk for cardiovascular risk is going down. So it may our results may mean that for cardiovascular risk the lower is better actually, which is a bit surprising perhaps, but because usually people are just saying that these diets are dangerous, and only like negative. Sometimes like in the media, the news are usually negative, but we have to keep in mind that there are also some positive effects of the diet. So there are some perhaps body image issues and some immunity issues, like we published that some immune regulation may go down, so there may be a higher risk to get sick when you are doing diet, and as we discussed, some hormonal issues during diet and menstrual cycle issues. But it doesn't mean that also some things are good. So these cardiovascular risk factors, visceral fat, they go down. So it's always like you have to keep in mind that all the things what we do with exercise, and if we exercise heavy, there are some things perhaps that are not so good and some things that are good. So they are always, you have to balance these kind of things. So I think that's good to keep in mind.
Yeah, and perhaps it can be also like a function of the heavy resistance training, for example, that the immune system goes down, but maybe like acutely.
In our study, what happens during diet, and usually what happens with the physique at least, is that they are normally training something like four times per week, resistance training, but the aerobic level, exercise level, is only like 2-3 times per day, perhaps per week, 2-3 times per week normally. But then during diet, amount of resistance training is not usually increased in these athletes, but they are increasing the aerobic exercise. So they are increasing aerobic exercise to be about 4 times, even 5 times per week, meaning that they are training about 9 times per week usually, something like that.
How long?
Well, it depends. Resistance training is probably like 1.5 hours, and aerobic is 30-60 minutes, something like that. It's not like super heavy and super high amount of exercise, but still you would say it's quite much, because you are dieting, so you are decreasing energy intake about 20%, and then you are increasing the amount of exercise. So then the energy deficit is going to be there, and certainly there are some red syndrome types of things that you can see there, like we could find. So this is a state where that you shouldn't continue too long. So certainly, even though there are some cardiovascular benefits, as I said, it's a good idea to have a recovery, at least for female physiology, because it's better to have some level of fat for health, probably.
Yeah, definitely. And now that if you can compare, like, what do you propose would be better, like a longer period of fat loss or something like more aggressive?
Yeah, I think it almost totally depends on the individual. So, for instance, some of us are quite have low fat to start with. Like I would be the one, and you would be probably. So we wouldn't need so long diet period. But then there are some individuals who quite easily gain weight during off season. So for them, certainly it should be longer, the time period for dieting, because there is some evidence, even we have shown and some others, that if you have a little bit slower weight loss, then there is a higher probability to maintain your muscle mass better during diet. Right. And also, because it's quite difficult to have a really fast diet with a sufficient amount of energy and protein and so on to sustain the heavy enough exercise. Because if you have a really fast diet, then you have to usually decrease the amount of protein and carbs quite a lot, and then you cannot really train heavy anymore, and you will lose your muscle mass. So there is evidence that it should be quite how to say, something like the max 0.5 kilos per week or something like that. Usually even lower. So actually there is a recent review of these athletes, and basically there are recommendations for the weight gain in the recommendation, and then before that there were recommendations for the weight loss, and for the weight gain period could be about same pace as the weight loss period after the diet. So perhaps like I mean, when you start the diet, sometimes there may be some lag period, so it doesn't immediately drop the body weight sometimes for some athletes, but then for some it's decreasing quite fast, depending on how the body reacts, let's say, to the decrease of carbohydrates, for instance. But I guess the recommendations now would be quite close to 0.3 to 0.5 kilos perhaps per week or something like that. And our athletes had if I remember correctly, on average quite close to this 0.5, so half a kilo per week, a bit less. Meaning, and then they could maintain the body muscle size pretty well. Mm-hmm. So I would say that's the pace to keep. So depending on how much you have fat and too much an extra weight, then you can calculate the length of the diet.
Yeah, I think there will be also like interpersonal variance, like when it comes to psychology of the person. Like somebody likes to do it like fast and short term, and somebody might or prefer to do it longer term.
Yeah, so now we had in Finland our national championships on start of October, and there were one of the champions in Finland did it in a way that he had a really long diet period, but he had a one month break during the summer because he wanted to relax. Right. So there are so many ways to do it. So it's not just having this linear type of diet, but you can modulate it and you can be flexible. And I guess if you are flexible, then you will succeed better.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. That's actually the approach that I take with most of the clients, that to do it like longer term. It allows them also to be like more flexible within the diet.
Yeah. So I think there is evidence to show in normal people that the more flexible.
So we were speaking about like why flexibility might be good for the longer term approach to dieting.
Yeah, there is some evidence in sort of normal people that the weight loss and body fat, lower body fat maintenance is better with more flexible diets, in a way that you allow the client to have some flexibility. So there is evidence, and it would be really weird if it wouldn't work in the fitness at least the same way. So I'm pretty sure that that's certainly the case. So athletes can be flexible, and when they have like psychological issues, sometimes I know this is like anecdotal, but some athletes have these time periods when they are not anymore losing fat for some reason. So it may be because they are so nervous, they are stressed. They may get even some increase of like when the stress hormones go really high. It's possible perhaps that their body fat levels, body water content is increased, and those kind of things may happen at least in females. And there are some other physiological changes that may happen during the diet that makes them not to lose weight, even though they are on a calorie deficit. So probably these diet breaks may do a good thing about the psychological issues. Diet breaks and flexibility may be good, because then there is less of these kind of problems, and then probably the sleep quality will be better, which is probably good. Training quality will be better. So I guess there are many. It's like it's like a common sense probably that having some flexibility there for most individuals is a good idea. But then there are perhaps some individuals who want to have really authoritative coach who just says everything what you should do, and for some maybe that's fine. I know there are some who just don't want to have any, they don't want to think, they just want to go on as it's said. But then the coach should probably program some flexibility for the athletes. So that's probably not like flexibility perhaps, but program these higher energy days or something.
Yeah, definitely. So from my perspective, it also gives your body, like this longer term approach, it gives your body time to adapt to these, let's say, physiological, mental changes, hormonal changes, and in that way it might be better.
Yeah. The only problem with long diet is probably that if you are competing once per year, then there is, if the diet period is really long, and then you need probably long recovery period, then there may not be time for off season where you want to have gains for muscle. So for those who are still haven't trained so much, or who has to increase their muscle mass, and so for them sometimes it may not be a good idea to have too long diet. But then I think there is not really any problem, because you don't have to compete every year. I mean, right? There is it should be a common sense that if you need to increase, if the problem in your physique is muscle mass, so then it should be a common sense that you should have time to really gain muscle, not just to diet back and forth. So this weight cycling is probably not so good idea if you wanna gain, because for instance in our individuals during this about 10 month period, or a bit less than 10-month period of weight loss and weight gain, most of the individuals are about at the same level after this 10 months period. Their muscle mass and fat mass is about the same. meaning that then during 10 months there is no progress that they have had. So they have competed once, but there is no progress. So if they would have just tried to gain muscle mass during the 10-month period, they would have probably got 1-2 kilos more muscle during the period. And that's the reason why you shouldn't compete every year if you want to really gain muscle, because it's a compromise always when doing dieting. You have to do it because in all the sports you have to compete, you know.
Yeah.
Competing, it's the same in other sports that you have to compete and that's it. But yeah, it's probably not a good idea to do it too often in these sports because the diet is so heavy, so intensive.
Right. So I would wrap it up now because I appreciate your time also and your expertise. And let me just ask you from the conference, what is something new that you learned or what stood out to you?
Yeah, so I participated in the conference in Slovakia, Bratislava here, and I think it was my 4th or 5th visit to Bratislava, and it was really nice, and it was nice conference. And so the first talk was that I heard after my talk was this carbohydrate talk, Garrett Wallace, and I think the one message that was quite new was this unpublished research that they showed, or he showed, was that this when you do this high fat diet, you have high fat diet. The reason why high fat diet perhaps increases fat use, relative fat use for energy, is not the high fat itself, but decreasing the carbohydrate intake. I think these new unpublished findings suggest that that's the reason. So when you are on a diet, you usually decrease carbohydrate intake. That is probably the reason for the increased relative fat use.
Well, that was a good point because I'm coming from the perspective of endurance athletes, you know, and there is always like there is always somebody who is arguing that, you want to get fat adapted, which means that you increase the number of calories or your fat percentage intake, you lower the carbs, so you burn more fat. Of course, if you are ingesting more fat and more fat comes from your food, you will be burning more fat.
Yeah. And the exercise itself also does it. So if you exercise in a fasted state, then you learn to burn a little bit more fat. But that was a bit like even a surprising finding that it was so clear that it's more about decreasing carbohydrates that somehow makes body to use relatively more fat for energy. But one has to keep in mind that it's not so. People are always thinking that it's just a good adaptation to burn more fat. But actually, in sports, it's actually the ability to use carbohydrates is more important than ability to use fat. Only like in some sports, maybe ultra endurance sports, ability to use fat is more important than carbohydrates. But for instance, in bodybuilding and resistance training, about 80% of the energy production comes from glycolysis and carbohydrate production. So this fat adaptation is not so important because it's more important to use carbohydrates well. Yeah, but anyway, that was interesting. And then there's Antonio Paoli, another English-speaking guest who was talking about ketogenic diet and about intermittent fasting, and he had an overall talk about these topics, and what would be something that I would have learned. I have read his papers before, but I think something that was quite interesting was the individual variation for this ketogenic diet. Right. Because now we know quite clearly that there are sports in which ketogenic diet is probably really bad. Bad idea like hockey, ice hockey. It would be really stupid probably to have a ketogenic diet for hockey players. But then there are some endurance athletes for whom, and maybe for MMA sports and so on, for during the diet, keto may be okay. But then there are some for whom it's a really big risk. So now he showed data from other studies and from their study, I think, as well. So that for some individuals it may be okay for a while, and for some not. And now, why is it so? I mean, now people are trying to understand the reasons, and he was suggesting that there are some evidence perhaps for microbiota. So maybe for some microbiota is a bit different. It doesn't allow them maybe to really go well with the keto, and for some it could. So that was quite interesting. But I would say it's quite a lot of psychological issue also probably. So I wouldn't have any chance to eat like keto, because I like carbs. And psychologically that's a big thing. If you like carbs, then keto probably don't work for you. I mean, that would be quite clear, I would say. And if you like to be carb adapted, if you like to you'd like to use carbs well, like I do resistance training, I play beach volleyball and those kind of sports where, carbohydrates are clearly more important than fats. So then for me, I clearly wouldn't like to be more fat adapted in that sense. But yeah, it's clearly during diet, reducing satiety in some, it may work. But then if the oxygen use is increased during endurance sports because of fat adaptation, that's probably not a good idea, like Louis Burke and others showed. So one has to keep in mind that fat adaptation doesn't mean that it's a good thing. It's not always a good thing. So it depends on the sports and on the athlete.
Like from my point of view, or how I say it, it's always like you have these two different engines, right? Like glycolytic, and then you have also the fat adaptation, let's say, and you want to be able to use both of them.
Yeah, it's good to use both of them, but then you shouldn't compromise the other too much if the sport is mainly about carbohydrates. And most of the sports I do, for instance, is about carbohydrates. And I don't want to
most of performance comes from carbohydrates, like you mentioned, or like also it was mentioned during the conference, like the benefit of ketogenic diet or fat adaptation itself could be for like ultra endurance sports, and I see maybe the usability for people who don't do sports, like for workers, office workers, and
for those who clearly are most of the day just using their fat, and they don't need this very strong and very good carbohydrate use and glycolytic energy systems. So it's clearly individual thing, and I think his talk again, and even more than the others, show that it's really individual, and one has to keep that in mind.
And when you also mentioned, like Mr. Paoli mentioned, that the individual variance can be due to microbiota. I don't know if you know, there is Bio-Optimizers, I think it's called. It's a website. There are, I think, two guys have it, and one is vegan, and the other one is on ketogenic diet. So pretty much the opposite one, high carb. The other one is very low carb. Both of them like perfect health, and they are also attributing it, or the success of their diet, why it works for them, is because of the digestibility. That, for example, vegan diet would not work for everybody because of digestive issues with too much fiber and so on. Like a ketogenic diet works for the other one is because it has a different microbiota which allows him, or works for him.
Maybe those are really interesting issues. Like for some they get some issues maybe from some peas and plants, maybe some people, and then for some it's just that they are perfect for their health. Like vegetarian diet is usually, for most, it's probably good for their health. But for some you cannot really tolerate those kind of amounts of fiber. So that's probably the future, that we we can think of those things as well.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay, so thank you very much for your time and for your experience and what you shared with me today, and let's see you next time.
Thank you.
If you like the podcast and you haven't done so already, please consider leaving a rating and a review online. And similarly, if you could share news about this podcast, I will be really glad and thankful. I mean, it would be great. And thank you for all of you who continue to do that.